we use, let's use blue. So here's our glucose. Comes into this system, C6H12O6. So this comes into our cell from our blood, and it went into our blood from our guts because we ate this stuff. It's our food. Does anybody remember? Raise your hand if you know where this first step takes place, because it's before it goes into the mitochondria. So where does it happen, Debbie? That's the name of it. So I fooled you by putting that one up there. So where does it happen? Cytoplasm. Good, thank you. So I didn't mean to trick you. So this happens in the cytoplasm. And remember, the cytoplasm is just all the fluid that is inside the cell. So this is occurring all over inside every single one of your cells. So you drink some orange juice, and you ingest a few 100 billion of these, no big deal. And so they go through your blood and into your cells, and they immediately start to be broken apart. Like that, and like that, but then it goes even more. But I'm not going to break it up more because I want to keep it together. All right? So it gets broken up into smaller and smaller bits, okay, so we can start to release these individual atoms eventually. Okay, either to use them or they're just going to come out as a waste product. All right, so I told you guys before that this is like look closer, I think it's actually a 10-step. There's actually 10 chemical reactions going on to make this smaller and smaller. All right. And Jackie, what was it called again? Glycolysis. Glycolysis, good. Glycolysis. Glycolysis, or my favorite mispronunciation, glycolysis. All right, so here we go. Let's scoot this over a little bit more so I can have some room. Because our next step is a cycle. So all that means is, as this gets broken up into smaller and smaller bits, if some of it isn't wasted out, it'll just re-enter the beginning of the chemical reaction again and get used eventually. Okay, so it makes your metabolism more efficient, so you get more energy out of the food you eat. So it comes inside here, and the end result ultimately is these atoms kind of hanging out by themselves. And I'm going to scoot this over a little bit so I can have more space. Oops. Move those guys over. Move that over. Here's some hydrogen, so we're going to use that actually. Move that over. All right, so what we learned was that the hydrogen gets to leave this system. And what charge were the hydrogens by themselves? Positive. Positive, good. And so these have a positive charge. And I have some of those all by their lonesome over here. But the C's and O's don't get to go on anymore. And they simply join forces, and you poof them out. So that's what you breathe out. So you'll breathe out a whole bunch of that all day long. Let's make more. Duplicate. Look at that. Beautiful. So you're breathing that stuff out. And again, have we used any oxygen yet? No. Yeah, not fresh oxygen. We're talking from the sky. And not including the oxygen that came off of the sugar. So we don't use that. We just breathe it out. All right. But we also have a negative charge, right? Did we discuss on Monday what the source is of the negative charges? Did we, Carl? Electrons, yeah. Some classes I told that, some I didn't. But you guys know that from junior high when you learn about the parts of the atoms. Protons are positive, neutrons are neutral, electrons were negative. All right, so they're on those sides of the membranes. So there's an electrical current there ready to go. And this is where a lot of you started, forgetting some things in your drawings. However, some of the more complicated stuff you guys didn't forget. So lots of you drew your ATP synthase. Okay, so that's spinning and making all these ATPs, right? If it's perfect, it's going to end up making like 36 total, okay, per glucose. So one of these is going to make 36 of those. All right, and then a lot of people kind of stopped right there, and that's what we had. But they forgot what makes this an even better system is when we breathe in oxygen. Because oxygen by itself is super duper negative. So we breathe in oxygen, right? And it's going around in our cells and in our mitochondria. But now it's in the presence of these guys, which are positive. So oxygen likes to be friends with the strongest charges. Okay, so it's pretty happy to be by itself, oxygen and oxygen. Okay, they're pretty happy. See that? They're loving each other. Okay, but if these are around, I can't hold them up. It's going to love these even more. So if these are next to each other, okay, they're going to jumble up, and those bonds are going to break, and they're going to reattach, and out comes Mickey Mouse. Water. And that's exactly what happens. Okay, so that's going to be present. It's going to pull the hydrogens through the ATP synthase, and that's literally what's going to spin it. Pretty much exactly like a microscopic electric motor. It's going to buddy up with the oxygens that you breathed in, and out comes water as a waste product. One more waste product out of here. Most of you guys wrote this. This whole system is making heat. It's not just this that's making heat, though. It's every time one of these things gets broken apart, heat is going to be released. Okay? So if I start this on fire, those bonds are going to break, and it's going to release a bunch of heat and some light as well. Okay, so same thing. It's like fire, but slowed down slower. So it doesn't release that much heat. You guys don't want to just start burning from inside out, do you? Fire, smoking. It would be cool, but it would only be cool once. Then you'd be dead. Lydia.
How many chemical reactions are going on in this?
I'm gonna answer that later because I can only show it to you in a picture. Okay, so she asked how many chemical reactions are really going on in this thing. Okay. So I will show you that later, but we'll finish this first. All right, so this is pretty much, well, it's almost all of it. We forgot some names, and we forgot to write down where it happened, but I kind of need to zoom out for that. All right, so if we scoot this down a little bit so we can have a little bit more room. All right, that looks beautiful. All right, raise your hand, please. Don't shout it out. Raise your hand if you can tell us one of the two names of this second step. Chris in the back. Krebs cycle is one, good. So some of you guys wrote Krebs cycle. So but it is Krebs, so you want to get that. You want to get that right. And you want to tell us the other one, Tyler? Citric acid cycle. Good. Citric acid. Okay, you want to know both of those. I'll show you where the citric acid name comes from. It'll be related to answering Olivia's question. All right, and this third one was tough for people. A lot of people got some of it. Raise your hand if you can tell us that, Carlos.
Electron transit change.
Close. He said transit. Same word, transport. All right. So electron transport chain. Okay, so what that means is these electrons are doing more actions than you guys are being taught. Okay, they're going back and forth in these membranes. Okay, getting these positive charges all excited. Okay, and then as soon as oxygen is present, they're like, holy cow, there's oxygen, and then off it goes to make the ATP. And the last thing we can put, this happened in the cytoplasm, right? But all of this stuff happened in what organelle?
Mitochondria.
The mitochondria, good. All right, so if you can draw that from beginning to end, and you guys did it with not a whole lot of practice, really, pretty dang good. Like 60, 70, maybe 80% of it you got down. Okay, so that's pretty excellent. With just a little bit more studying, you'll be able to remember the last 20%, and you guys will be good to go. Okay, if you're like me and you think it's incredibly cool that this is photosynthesis in reverse, I'm going to show you that in a second. But before we do, are there any questions on what you just saw so far? So you guys have probably a cleaner version of this in your notes, but you guys are free to keep that. But if you have a nicer version in your notes, you guys can recycle that later. But don't do it right now, please. All right, so let me set this up. I'm going to erase some things. I can only go back so far, it looks like. All right, so I'm going to leave the molecules where they are, because those are going to be reused. I'll erase these ones just to clean things up a little bit. And then we got to erase these. So we're going to change names when we do this backwards, right? So we're used to drawing this from left to right. Okay, so we're going to be going from right to left this time. If you read in Japanese, I guess it's okay. Anyone? Yeah, 'cause they read, don't they read up and then to the left?
Yeah.
Is that what it is? Yeah. Some of those comic books, those Japanese comic books are written that way too. All right, so I'm only going to make one, well, it's a small change up here, but in reality it's a huge difference. So our source of energy isn't going to be ATP. Okay, our source of energy in photosynthesis is obviously the sun, right? Beautiful sun, thank you. All right, and I need to add a chemical that can actually use the power of the sun. What are those? Chlorophyll, right? So if you're saying chloroplast, all this happens inside the chloroplast. Okay, so that's, people are still missing that on the assessment, so make sure you study that a little bit and slow down on the test. All right, so now if we just go ahead and start reversing everything that we just learned, water, instead of going out, is brought in. The dancing chlorophyll breaks the water apart, right, into our hydrogens. It's also going to be the source of electrons. And then the oxygen is just a waste. So the oxygen is now let go instead of brought in. All right. This plus and minus, and that's going to power our ATP synthase, but just the other direction. So now we have some ATP to power this cycle in the opposite direction. So instead of releasing CO2, it's going to suck CO2 in. You guys with me so far? Okay. So now we have C's and O's. We already have a source of hydrogen. And in the end, some of this ATP is going to put them together and make what?
Glucose.
Glucose. A carb. Glucose is then going to make starch later on. It's going to make cellulose later on. And bam, you got a tree. Or a cactus in this case. So I didn't change a whole lot other than the arrows and a very special pigment that is unique to green things. All right? And again, what organelle did this happen in?
Chloroplast.
Chloroplast. Good job. All right, so if you can draw one, you can draw the other. And if you just use your eraser carefully. So that's kind of the way it works for my brain. Raise your hand if this is good for your brain. This helps you. And so it's only some of you. Okay, how many of you just prefer to just draw it separately and kind of keep them separate in your brain? Okay, and that's a little bit more than the majority. All right, so cool. So that helps some of you. The rest of you just like, I don't care. All right. Any questions?